Scripture reading is from the first chapter of Kings, or the first Kings, chapter 18, verse 41, through chapter 19, verse 7. It begins on page 374 in your Pew Bibles, and continues on to 375. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go eat and drink, for there is a sound of heavy rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. "Go and look toward the sea," he told his servant, and he went up and looked. "There is nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain came, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by that food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God.
Good morning. Is this thing on? I'm on my end. Can you hear me? So my experience with Narcotics Anonymous has shown me a lot about what crashing and burning can look like in people's lives. And it's also taught me a lot about what doing some soul searching after a crash like that can do. We can look back and see where things went wrong. And just like when they pull that little black box out of the plane, at times we find ourselves in kind of an autopsy mode. And if we don't take a moment to work through what happened and how we got in the place that we are, we're doomed to keep crashing until our pain outweighs our fear and growth once again is possible in our lives. And I believe that walking in the Spirit is something that's very much a journey toward the truth. We learn about the truth of God. We also learn the truth about ourselves. And as God's power flows through us, we come to recognize our own limitations. You know, God is without limits, but we are very human. And even the most powerful race cars has its limits. And when that car is kept past that little red line for too long, that car is bound to break down. And Elijah here, somewhere along the way, has been working in the red zone for too long. He's crossed that line. And like many of us, he finds out that when we cross that line for too long, and we run on empty for too long, there is this cost. And eventually we come to this point in our lives where something has to change. I think a lot of us find it shocking because we think that following God is just going to make everything in our lives go well. That when we see the power of God at work in us, that we have arrived and that everything is going to be fine. But I think many of us are shocked to see that even in someone like Elijah, where God was clearly at work, he still has this inward struggle with his doubts and with his fear and with his failure. And some of us, and I'm guilty of that, are especially impatient and frustrated with our limitations. But limitations, or rather learning about our limitations, is truly a gift. It's a gift because it shows us that we need God. It's sometimes only that when we come to the end of ourselves that we find the beginning of faith, or the beginning of grace, or the beginning of where God touches our lives. We find God in those places where we know that we can't do it all of ourselves. And humility is not something that's celebrated in our culture and in our time. It's hated by our ego. But just like a spiritual tune-up in our lives, I believe there are two ways that we can process this sort of experience. We can crash and burn and become discouraged by our weaknesses being revealed. I think that's what most of us like to do. Or we can realize that this spiritual tune-up is a gift. It is a sign that we are doing what we were made for, just like that race car. And to push that race car analogy further, we can either spend our time examining all the work orders in the glove box, we can beat ourselves up for all the oil changes and tune-ups and tires that we've gone through, or we can get back through this pit stop and do what we were made to do. We can go out there and race. And I think some of us are wounded and broken by those experiences, and we find that we just come to this place where we're licking our wounds and wallowing in self-pity and despair. And that's not something that Elijah was immune to. We see that at work in this passage. But God doesn't want to leave us there. God wants to call us out of that and into more of his power and more of his ways that he wants to work in our lives. I want to read a little bit of a speech from Theodore Roosevelt, and this speech has actually meant a lot to me because in our culture sometimes it's so much easier to criticize everything. It's so much easier to critique than create. To look back from this kind of place of I don't know what you call it, a place of aloofness, and look at what other people are doing and just say, oh, I wish you could do it better. Here's the speech. It's entitled, "The Man in the Arena." It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. You know, when we dare big things with God, we find that. We find that God doesn't want us to be comfortable. God wants us to be out there like that man in the arena, working our faith out with fear and trembling, and doing what God has made us to do. And following God will change the temperature of our lives. It's full of mountaintop experiences, but it's also full of lows, not just spiritual highs. Everything isn't just going to fall into place and we're going to have this magical mountaintop experience every time, every day if we follow the Lord. I wish that was the case sometimes, but that's not it. And if we think that that's what the spiritual life that God is calling us to is going to be, we're going to be disappointed and frustrated and angry. And following God definitely has places where we come to the end of ourselves. I want to skip forward a little bit to the New Testament here and just read this advice that the Apostle Paul gave to his protege Timothy. He's talking about the Spirit of God at work. He said, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." And when we look at the life of Elijah, we see very much a man in the arena. We see a man struggling mightily for the purposes of God. We see highs, like in his encounter with the prophets of Baal, and his bold declaration that God will stop the rain or bring the rain. But we also see lows in his self-doubt, in his failure, in his running away, in his encounter with the ends of himself. And may we dare to know that kind of faith, that kind of struggle. Elijah didn't celebrate a low-stakes spirituality. He embraced God's power, he embraced God's love, and rarely in our day he embraced that kind of self-discipline that God is calling him to. After hitting that wall, Elijah discovered that God was calling him out beyond his fear. Well, let's look at this story a little bit. We have this confrontation with Elijah and the false prophets, and God answers in a big way, and he sends fire from heaven, he sends rain from heaven. And then Elijah gets this threat of retaliation. And we should note here that Elijah isn't afraid of the king, he's afraid of the queen. He's afraid of the wrath of this woman Jezebel. It's the fury of this woman that has Elijah running for his life. And Elijah has just watched the power of God work in some really big ways. And now it seems that his faith, as it's tested, it begins to sputter. We see Elijah running scared. He wrestles with doubting God's call. And he wrestles with feeling like a failure. He is near suicidal, praying for his own death. And he feels like he has done all this stuff and worn himself out, and it's all been for nothing. Elijah says, I'm no better than my ancestors. And in the book of Kings, his ancestors were those faithless people who led the people into idolatry. So he's saying to himself, I've had zero impact. Everything I've done doesn't matter. Everything that God just did through me is all for nothing. And we might think, well, Elijah, he needs more faith. Elijah needs revival. He needs some spiritual encouragement. Perhaps Elijah needs a change of attitude. But what does God bring him instead? God doesn't bring him just spiritual renewal. God addresses his physical needs. Elijah sleeps. God sends food and water, and Elijah sleeps some more. And God sends even more food through this angel. And God sends gives him this time to break and eat and be nourished and get strong again for the journey. And I think sometimes we just need to stop. Sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is take a nap. I know that our American sense of individualism and ruggedness just bristles at the thought. We think about laziness, We think about people who refuse to work themselves to death. But I think we have to stop sometimes and take care of our bodies. We're not disembodied spiritual beings. And I believe that how we treat our bodies betrays how we treat our spirits. We're inviting people into this journey of 50 days of prayer. And this prayer is especially a prayer for revival among our denomination, revival among our church. And I think that's really awesome that we're going to try to do that. But if we just try to cram one more thing into our lives, I don't think we're ever going to see revival. We'll probably be too exhausted to experience revival. We can't experience revival if we're worn out all the time. We can't experience revival if we have no place for Sabbath in our lives. There's no energy left to spend on what God is calling us to do. And I promise you that how you live and the choices that you make do affect the way that God is at work through you. If you stay up all night watching Netflix or playing your Xbox, or if you never exercise, or you just eat junk food all the time, or a workaholic or an alcoholic, it's going to affect your spiritual growth. It will affect your readiness to do big things with God. And there will be a lag in your spiritual responsiveness, just like there's a lag in your physical responsiveness. Mike Brzezinski, a week or two ago, I know I'm picking on him, he's looking at me crazily, but he said this, he was quoting Benjamin Franklin, and he said this: equal parts work, sleep, and leisure make a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And I think that there's some truth to that. And God is calling Elijah back to a more balanced life. When we let ourselves get too out of balance, we experience the same sorts of things that Elijah did. We experience loneliness and isolation and apathy. We let fear and worry push us past the tipping point, and we start doubting God's call in our lives. And this fear and doubt can paralyze us and stop us from growing in the ways that God is calling us to grow. And I believe it's spiritual to pray and read our Bibles. It's good for our souls. It's spiritual to come to worship and be among the people of God. But it's also spiritual to rest, to pursue our passions. It's also spiritual to play. And some things we do not because we want to, but because we need to. As Paul told Timothy, God's Spirit is at work in us in power, but also in love and self-discipline. And self-discipline is not only about what you do, it's about what you don't do. It's living lives pruned that we can be even more connected with God, even more fruitful. And sometimes we have to say no to some things in order to say yes to the right things. As Thomas Kelly, the great Quaker mystic, puts it, we have to come to that place in our faith journey where we recognize that saying no can be just as faithful as saying yes. And if we would seek to have the power of God at work in us, just like it's at work in Elijah, we have to pay attention to when we've crossed that red line, that little red line on the RPM gauge of our life. We must learn the lessons found in coming to the end of ourselves and watching God take it from there. We can't always be pouring ourselves out, or we're just going to be empty and dry. And like a wanderer lost in the desert, the hot winds of fear will sap our strength and parch our throats and have us chasing mirages to our own peril. So we need to go back to the well. We need to go back to be with God and rest and experience the joy of walking with Him. And I think Sabbath is a radical thing, but Sabbath is really God's solution to this. Sabbath can give us a break from the insanity of the world. Sabbath rest is resistance. It is trusting that God will take care of us. We limit ourselves in humble obedience that God will be enough. Excuse me. And there are mountaintop experiences in spiritual life as well as valleys. There are moments when we pursue God and He demands great things of us. There are spiritual seasons and cycles. And this week, I'll just confess, has been especially draining to me for all kinds of reasons. Some you probably know about, a whole bunch that you probably don't know about. And yesterday, I took a nap for an hour. And then I woke up and I did something, and did a little bit of work, and I was still so tired that I couldn't even work on this sermon. And so I took another nap for a half an hour. And I was way past the point where that was an optional thing. And some things that I wanted to get done this week never got finished. Important things. Things that drive me a little bit batty, like I never put away all this stuff from the Super Bowl party downstairs. You know, house this week like I planned. All it is walking downstairs and popping out this little thing and putting it back in, and I'm done. It took me 5 minutes, but I just didn't have the energy to do it. You know, I think it's easy for us to live our lives where we cross that tipping point. And I think it's easy for us to keep working and keep working and keep working until we're like that moth that's beating itself up against the light bulb to our own death. And sometimes we just need to stop and put our own oxygen mask on before we can help another person in any way. But as we do that, it's doing what we were made to do. And if we do what we're made to do, we're going to find that line. We're going to find that place where we cross over into the red zone. And we'll find that as we give more control to God, we'll trust Him more for our provision. And we'll let go of the feelings of short-term successes and short-term gains and little checklists that we can be proud about. We can let go of patting ourselves on the back for cramming too much stuff in our day. And we can let God prepare us for the long haul that is the spiritual life. So make no mistake, limits are a gift. Sabbath is a grace. And we're not as important as we might suppose. There's a movie by Stanley Kubrick called The Shining. And Jack Nicholson in that book, he goes completely mad. And there's this part in the movie where he says, he keeps saying it over and over again, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And I think this sort of thinking is a thinking that goes unchallenged in our lives, and it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for a bipolar spiritual life. And God is at work in us out there beyond ourselves. And the wisest people among us are those who can cease long enough to see it, who can trust that the whole world won't fall apart if we go to sleep or stop to grab a bite to eat, or say no here or there in the name of faithfulness. And it's not laziness or selfishness that many of us need to worry about. There are probably many in this room who need to worry about that. But there's probably just as many for whom working ourselves for too long will just have us crumple just like Elijah. For whom life is making ourselves so tired that we forget that God is bigger than those who oppose us. And we take that unnecessary journey out into the wilderness, and we do it without the habits that we need to survive there. So as we go into open worship, I just want you to think about that. To think about your body, and how you take care of it. to think about the kind of things that God gives us to counteract that apathy and frustration. Because we want to live without limits, but we can't do it. We're not God. And so to let God be at work in our lives often calls us to obedience. It calls us to self-examination. It calls us to thinking about where that line is to where we can do the most that God is calling us to do, and do it with joyfulness, not drudgery. So we'll go into a time of open worship, and if you feel led by the Spirit, please stand and speak. A microphone will be brought